All right, we have some breaking news for you, and this just happened in the last few moments. A confirmation that the Queen has died. Of course, we've been reporting on the royal family sort of descending on Balmoral Castle in Scotland. These are some of the live visuals right now. This looks like Buckingham Palace, and we're joined by our international editor, Sophie Mokoena. So, Sophie, this just confirmed.
Yes, this just confirmed. All the big international news networks are running the story. And also, when you look at the website of the royal family, the announcement is there. And it was clear, let me say, Francis, this morning when, or later in the afternoon, when we saw members of the family going to Balmoral.
And Sophie, of course, you know, one has indeed, as you say, you know, the fact that all of them had to be told to rush. Everybody had been, you know, really being rallied about. And Laura saying the same thing, that it was quite concerning that everybody was being asked to go to the palace, which really signaled that something serious had happened.
Yes, indeed. We heard earlier on that Prince Charles was first to arrive. And of course, later we saw Prince Andrew and the others, including the grandson William, arriving. And when you look at the visuals of family members, you could see that they were all distraught. And that was an indication that something is not going right. But also, when they were talking about the medical team that is surrounding the Queen and looking after her, that was clear that something was definitely happening. But also, remember, I pointed out that on Tuesday, when she was doing the formalities of confirming the Prime Minister of Great Britain or United Kingdom, that is Liz Truss, many people did observe, particularly the hands, that there's something wrong with the Queen. And fortunately, she was able to see her Jubilee. She did participate in some of the events. But because of this problem of mobility, even then, during those celebrations, she had to cancel some of the activities. And at that time, many people were very clear that something is happening, she is struggling. And now the news.
Yeah, and this is from The Guardian, saying that Prince Charles is 73, heir to the throne since the age of 3. So waiting in the wings for a very long time. He is now king. He will officially be proclaimed at St. James Palace in London as soon as practically possible. And that statement you were talking about, Sophie, Buckingham Palace, saying the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. And we were talking about her mixed legacy earlier. Obviously, in Africa, a lot of mixed feelings, given the fact that this was a commonwealth, this was a colonizing nation earlier, and even within Britain, mixed feelings about the Queen. But certainly, Sophie, the whole nation will have a long period of mourning ahead.
Yes, indeed. I mean, to make an example, the current Prime Minister who took office on Tuesday is one person who was not in support of monarchy. And when she was supposed to go to Scotland, to Balmoral, for these formalities, the main story was around, finally she's meeting the Queen, the person that she has criticized. And on the continent, it's even a bigger issue, because the problem here, you're talking about colonialism. I mean, I remember during the Jubilee, we did a story around the crown, and people questioning what was used to put together that crown, and people talking about how they are aggrieved in terms of what the monarchy stood for then, even though later years they did try to undo the legacy. But the reality is, when you look at the history books, you have that mixed reaction to her passing on, but also her role as a head of Commonwealth because of issues that are related to colonialism. And I think if perhaps the crew can bring that story. There's a package that speaks to the relationship between South Africa and the Queen. Maybe we can look at that to track back her visit in 1947, in 1995, and also in 1999.
And we will be bringing you that story as also for you talk about it, because it's also interesting that as people look at this history, you were alluding to it even a little earlier on, you know, one of the anecdotes you mentioned, which, you know, really stuck with me, is just how Madiba was calling her, you know, Elizabeth. And you think of how she's also met even, you know, all the presidents of South Africa, which also speaks of this history that is interwoven between us and, you know, the UK.
Yes, before we get to that, you can see the writing there outside the gate, and that's what they normally do when someone has arrived or a child is born, and now the announcement in terms of when someone has passed on, and a clear confirmation that the Queen is no more. Yes, the relationship, Madiba, I used to travel a lot with former President Nelson Mandela on retirement, and it is during those trips where I was able to engage with Madiba in a very informal way, but also Madiba's team. And I remember Zelda telling me that when they were in London, when Madiba was meeting Queen Elizabeth, and everybody cringed when Madiba walked in, and the first thing that he uttered was, "How are you, Elizabeth?" And the whole house was shrinking because they expect those protocol and formalities.
And of course, that official notice, Francis, as we were able to get closer to see, talks about her dying peacefully this afternoon, confirming, you know, the passing. And you can imagine these people that are clipping away, you know, really clicking with their cell phones, trying to capture that very announcement, because it has been one of the big stories. And the crowds, of course, gathering, Francis, you know, around that palace. So really, one moment, as also he says, that is really quite big, especially whether or not, you know, you understood the history of monarchy, but ultimately she was a newsmaker.
All right, well, let's look back. I mean, Sophie earlier saying that Africa interwoven in the story of the Queen's life. She has shaken the hands of, I think it's 15 prime ministers. I mean, imagine the history that she has seen. And let's just bring up some of the moments on your screen now, looking back at some of those highlights. We saw 2022 there, and certainly she has seen Britain change. She has been through rocky divorces of family members. Recently, her grandson basically saying he did not want to perform those official duties and did not want to take money from the state, and in effect separating himself and Meghan Markle from the royal family in terms of those official duties, and a lot of controversy within the UK itself about how much money the family receives, where it goes. She has this mixed legacy, certainly in Africa, because she came to the helm when Britain was treating colonies as if they were their own, its own.
And you know, one thinks about this moment, Francis, as we're watching these visuals, but you're thinking about that moment in 1952 when her father, you know, King George, passes away in his sleep. And now the princess is in Kenya, and you can only imagine she was in Kenya en route to Australia and New Zealand. She was just, you know, very young at the time. And this now, after the period of mourning, she has to take over, you know, the royalty from her father. So one can only imagine at the time, as she was young and really just trying to make sense of her of losing her father, Francis, but now has to even lead a nation. And you think about, you know, as you can see on the screen, her early years. I mean, in 1926, she was born this on the, you know, the 21st of April. Her grandfather, King George V, dying on the 20th of January. So honestly, when you think about her, you know, her life, one can even think about those very moments early on when it would signal that she would have to at some point take over.
Yeah, but originally she wasn't destined to be a queen. It was only because of an abdication that her father became King George VI. There you see in 1936. So suddenly the realization, those who look back at her life, suddenly the realization that yes, this is her destiny, even though she wasn't born into that immediate line. We saw the flag flying at half-mast there, and we're just looking back at the life of Queen Elizabeth, the longest reigning sovereign ever in the UK, ever.
And you know, when we talk about this abdication, Francis, I always think about it because when you look at her reign, it kind of almost signaled the difficulties that she will also need to deal with during her reign, as well, as you alluded to even earlier on,
family
when it comes to some of the family ructions, because here is a moment of abdication. The royal household is dealing with it. She's not even, you know, thinking about what might be her future at that moment. But it also then thrusts her right into it, and then she has to deal with all of this. And you know, you think about even that that public, you know, moment when Oprah was even interviewing, you know, the Duke and the Duchess of Sussex. So quite a lot has, you know, really happened.
Yeah, a lot of topsy-turvy relationships, and of course people are looking at her relationship with Princess Diana, saying, you know, this has also played out, kind of affecting her popularity, but still we saw there that her first official trip was to South Africa. Sophie, we were talking about this earlier, and then she became queen while she was in Kenya, and then we move on. King George VI died while she was in Kenya. Just look back again for us and tell us how that played out.
Yes, indeed. As I pointed out earlier on, in 1947, she traveled to South Africa with her parents and her sister. They were visiting South Africa, particularly quite a number of Commonwealth member states, or those countries that were under the British colonial rule. That includes Lesotho, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. And it was in Cape Town where she celebrated her 21st birthday. And that speech that she delivered, you know, the 21st birthday speech, was almost like a prophetic speech, because then she pointed out that she's willing to serve the people, and she was committed to do just that. And when you look at her reign, she did that in terms of her role as the head of state of Britain, but also as the head of Commonwealth, and she didn't waver. And I think when she went to Kenya, it was in 1952. It was almost like a honeymoon with the husband, Prince Philip. But while they were in Kenya, that's when the news came that his father has passed on and she has to take over. And then she had to abandon the trip, go back to United Kingdom, and start with her responsibilities. And when you look at that country, Kenya, it is the very same country where William got engaged with the wife, you'd recall. And I think that relationship, the bond between UK and royal family and Kenya then continued. But in South Africa also, it's a mixed bag, because you know that some of the glitters you see on that crown were donated by those who are in charge of the mines, the diamond mines, and people are still aggrieved. And I think this is who she is. But like I said, later years, they did accept that they cannot continue with the colonial rule, and of course she was opposed to apartheid, and that's why they didn't agree with Margaret Thatcher, who was supporting the apartheid. People don't know that there was a standoff between the Queen and Margaret Thatcher because the Queen wanted South Africa, the apartheid regime then, to take a different approach and direction on issues related to the apartheid system. And therefore there was that hostility between her and Margaret Thatcher, who was pro-apartheid government.
And, you know, also you also talk about Prince Philip, you know, her husband. Really, one of the things that we saw after his passing in 2021, on their 50th, you know, wedding anniversary in 1997, she, you know, really spoke about how much of a pillar of strength he's been for her. And he said that, in fact, if I quote, he has quite simply been my strength and stay over all of these years, really pointing towards, you know, one of the stories that she holds dear to her heart. And you think about Prince Philip retiring from public life in 2017 and the Queen also beginning to hand over some of the duties to her son. And you can almost see that there has been kind of a preparation for the moment where we find ourselves now.
Yes, indeed. You know, after the passing on of Prince Philip, she did just that, to try and hand over some of the responsibilities to the children, particularly Prince Charles, and of course William, the grandson, and other members of the family. And indeed, he was a pillar. From day one, they met and they got married. He was always on her side. And that is why when he passed on, many people were asking questions around whether she will be able to soldier on, is she going to have strength, and all of that. And I think at that time it was clear that she was going to be affected, and a senior citizen or a senior person, when you have to deal with all these eventualities, you know, it does take toll in terms of your system. But also I think the controversies within the family are now recently Prince Andrew, who was fingered in terms of sexual harassment cases, even though he was not charged. And also the tension in the royal family, particularly the two grandchildren, William and Harry, and that whole tension also, I think as a matriarch, she had to manage all those tensions, and definitely they were bound to take toll. You can see now the river in London. These are the visuals during the time where she was still able to continue with her duties.
So if we look back, and maybe we can go back to that timeline, so if you're looking at her early years and then her coronation taking place in 1953 in Westminster Abbey, crowned Queen Elizabeth II at the young age of 27, and that's worth bearing in mind just how young she was when she ascended the throne. Colonialism was the reality into which she was born, and then Prince Andrew, born in 1960, according to the unofficial historians, the biographers, the makers of the Queen, for example, her favorite son. And we've been talking about those ructions, and he certainly landed in hot water of late. Now,
yes, indeed, Francis, you are correct. But perhaps the other important issue is that she has tried her whole life to ensure that she is able to rally the nation, you know, behind the flag, and also to try and unite the nation during the difficult times. And I think what she did on Tuesday was part of that, trying to unite the nation and put a brave face to say the current changes in the United Kingdom, we will be able to win this storm.
So we were looking back, and earlier Queen Elizabeth II celebrating a platinum jubilee. Much was done around that, certainly in London and across the UK, and the world was watching as well, to see sort of what face the royal family would put on. There was some concern about her health at that point, and the family was mired in controversy due to the decision of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex to move to to America. And Prince Andrew was also embroiled in a scandal at that time.
And of course, our international news editor Sophie Mokoena has taken a look at the Queen's visit to South Africa since 1947.
Following day marked Princess Elizabeth's coming of age and a public holiday for Cape Town, the centre of worldwide rejoicing. Very appropriately, the Princess took the salute at a youth rally and thoroughly enjoyed a lively display. Climax of the occasion was the children's version of a familiar birthday greeting.
The young Elizabeth, accompanying her parents, King George VI, and her mother, Queen Elizabeth I. Here, reading a speech on the 21st birthday that coincided with her visit in South Africa. It is on this continent in Kenya, during her visit in 1952, where the young Elizabeth, a newlywed, got a message from her husband, Prince Philip, that her father, King George VI, has passed on.
The tragic news reached Princess Elizabeth and her husband while in Kenya, and the new Queen left immediately for London. Sad homecoming of a young Queen. The Atalanta was punctual, and bearing a message from the Queen Mother, the Duke of Gloucester entered the plane. And then, bravely concealing her emotions, Queen Elizabeth II emerged. With perfect composure, she greeted the Prime Minister and all who had come to meet her. Her Majesty graciously thanked the crew of the Atalanta, and only a few minutes after the arrival, she and the Duke of Edinburgh said goodbye to Mr. Churchill and left the airport for Clarence House.
The incident that completely changed her life. She was back at the southern tip of the continent again in 1995 during the presidency of the late former President Nelson Mandela, and setting her foot in Cape Town again, where she made a prophetic speech on her 21st birthday, returning to this country, now being a queen and the head of the Commonwealth. Former President Mandela also visited Buckingham Palace. And to Madiba, she was just Elizabeth.
The President of the Republic of South Africa and Her Majesty, the Queen.
The Queen later returned to South Africa during the Commonwealth Summit that was hosted by Madiba's successor, Thabo Mbeki, who was then a head of state of South Africa.
Mr. President, Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, President Mandela and Mrs. Graça Machel.
Mbeki also visited Buckingham Palace in the year 2000. Former President Kgalema Motlanthe met the Queen in 2009 at the G20 summit. Jacob Zuma, the former president, also met the Queen in 2010, while the current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, met the Queen in 2018. This is a tradition within the Commonwealth family to meet the Queen at the Buckingham Palace when heads of state and government are on the state visit to the United Kingdom. Sophie Mokoena, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Kenya has a special place in the history of the current British monarchy, for it is while in Kenya that the then President Elizabeth learned of the death of her father.
Being the heir to the throne at the time, she became queen, therefore, whilst in the country, then a country of British colonial rule. Let's look back.
The tragic news reached Princess Elizabeth and her husband while in Kenya, and the new Queen left immediately for London.
In February 1952, Princess Elizabeth and her husband began a Commonwealth tour with a visit to Kenya. News of her father, King George VI's death reached the royal couple, and it was the duty of Prince Philip to break the news to his wife.
Her emotions, Queen Elizabeth II emerged.
And so, 5 days after arriving in Kenya, she left as a queen. More than a year later, her coronation took place in Westminster Abbey on June 2nd, 1953. The hotel where they stayed while in Kenya was burned down by the Mau Mau, a resistance movement against the British colonialists, but a new one was put up. It shut its doors last year due to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. A year earlier, on June 1st, 1952, Kenya had attained internal self-rule, marking the end of the British colonial rule. Sarah Kimani, SABC News, Kenya.
All right, if you've just tuned in, Queen Elizabeth II has died. She was the longest-serving sovereign in the UK, 70 years on the British throne, 70 years, and she died at the age of 96. So obviously we've been monitoring this, whether you're a royalist or not, regardless of what you think of her legacy, this is going to be huge news around the world, one of the most recognized figures in the world. A lot of countries have monarchies, none as high profile as the UK monarchy, and everything has been confirmed. We already see flags flying at half-mast. Prince Charles is now King Charles. Camilla, the Queen Consort, that has been confirmed, and they will stay in Scotland and then head to London tomorrow.
And of course, Francis, quite a number of people, will be gathered. You can only expect to see crowds gathering and, of course, laying some flowers, as it has been, in the past. So certainly quite a busy, time it's going to be, as even you think about tonight, for example, when the news of her not being well, we saw statements even from US President Joe Biden. We saw, statements coming from the new British Prime Minister Liz Truss wishing her well. We saw statements from Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister. So you can only expect quite a lot, of messages that are going to be pouring in. And even as we, look back at this moment when she marked, 70 years on the British throne, and this, of course, was that Platinum Jubilee celebrations that were in full swing in London, in some of, and in some of the Commonwealth countries as well, Francis.
Yeah, so she lived to see that Platinum Jubilee. Let's take a look back. One of the prominent features of her reign has been the Queen's crown, and it has stood the test of time. Kaelihle Kumalo has more.
It's called the Imperial States Crown, and it represents the sovereignty of the British monarch. The crown is made up of over 2,900 precious stones, including the Cullinan diamond that was sourced in South Africa in 1905. The Cullinan produced several stones, including one of the largest clear-cut diamonds in the world, the Great Star of Africa. The celebration of the Platinum Jubilee has started in earnest in the British capital, London.
So to begin with, we've got the 1953 Coronation dress, and that kind of moves through into the Order of the Garter mantle, and obviously the Imperial State Crown. And we also have, again, more of her well-known dresses, such as the yellow dress, which she wore in 2018.
Queen Elizabeth II has worn the crown numerous times throughout her reign, including at her coronation in 1953. Recently, the Queen quipped that you don't look down to read the speech if you're wearing the iconic crown. You just have to hold the speech up, because if you do look down, your neck would break and it would fall off. British politicians are mindful that the Queen is marking this milestone without her beloved Duke of Edinburgh.
We know that these celebrations will be tinged with sadness for Her Majesty by the absence of the Duke of Edinburgh, her strength and stay. And so I hope in the coming days that we can together further comfort her and reassure her, and show with every bonfire, with every concert and street party and aerobatic display, a love and a devotion to reciprocate the love and devotion and leadership she has shown to the whole country over 7 decades.
70 years is unprecedented for a British monarch. The Queen is record-breaking, groundbreaking. When we think back to her accession, young 20-something woman, we think back to 1950s Britain, and now 70 years on, so much has changed, but she remains.
The Queen has been seen in public only on few occasions after she spent a night in hospital last year for an unspecified illness, after which she was told to rest by her doctors. Kalihle Kumalo, SABC News, Johannesburg.
We'll continue to, bring you the very latest on this particular story, the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. You can only, Francis, really, as we take back a moment in history, there's been quite a lot of historic moments that are worth talking about, and Vuyo is going to be doing just that as we now hand over to the Watchdog.